Okay, we are on Pei Aleph Amud Aleph 81a in the Mishnah. Next section of the Gemara is going to be about finding and defining the actual prohibition from the text of the Torah. And the key word here is prohibition, because the Torah does not say, thou shalt not eat on Yom Kippur. Torah says, thou shalt inflict pain upon yourself. Inui, that's the word we've been using the whole time, right? But that is not a negative commandment, do not do. It's not a prohibition, it's a positive commandment. And generally speaking, these punishments in Torah are delineated for violation of prohibitions rather than failing to do a commandment, which that's what this would be. It would be the failure to do a commandment. You fail to fast, you fail to inflict pain, you fail to fulfill the obligation of inui. Whereas all the punishments, kares, lashes, excuse me, even, okay, karbanos are a different story, but most of these punishments are related to violation of prohibition. And the Torah does not say so explicitly. So once the Mishnah defines for us the fact that it is indeed a prohibition and treated like a prohibition rather than just the failure to do a positive commandment, the Gemara is going to get into a lengthy discussion of how we know that it is a prohibition at all, when seemingly it's just the positive commandment, thou shalt inflict pain upon yourself, rather than a prohibition, do not eat, right? That's what the Gemara is going to end up doing after the Mishnah defines for us that it is treated like a prohibition. It says the Mishnah like this, right in the middle of the page where it says big bold words, Mas Nisan, our Mishnah. Achal v'shosa v'helem echad, if one ate or drank in one go, which means like this, depending on how you want to do it. Let's say we're talking about carbon, means we're talking about inadvertently. So the person didn't know it was Yom Kippur and ate and drank. That's called helam literally means like a concealment, one concealment. There's only one not knowing. I didn't know it was Yom Kippur, let's say. Or I forgot that it's prohibited, I forgot that it's forbidden to eat. As opposed to someone who ate and then was reminded it's Yom Kippur and then an hour later forgot. That would be twice that they were in the mistaken mode, as opposed to here where the person ate and drank in one mistaken mode, in one unknowing ate and drank. So ein chayav ela chatas achas, only liable for one sin offering. If it was intentional, it's a question of kares, a question of excision. There is only one excision. You can't have two excisions. When it's inadvertent, it becomes two offerings in the temple. Why two? Even though we finished saying in the last few classes that eating and drinking are of a different measure, right? There's a different amount for eating, a different amount for drinking, because my taking off the edge of thirst and taking off the edge of hunger are two separate issues. Nonetheless, they are still lumped together in one description of the Torah. Thou shalt inflict pain, which includes both eating and drinking. And therefore, even though you did two acts, only one violation really was done. The violation against not inflicting pain upon yourself. And thus, only one offering. But if one ate on Yom Kippur and did a prohibited work on Yom Kippur, like Shabbos, even though it was done under the guise of one forgetfulness, person forgot today was Yom Kippur and did two prohibitions, eating and doing work. So even then, the person's liable to bring two sin offerings, because even though it was under one forgetfulness, but the violation was two separate commandments. One is a commandment to rest on Yom Kippur, and one is a commandment to inflict pain. Because you violated two commandments, there's two sin offerings. Whereas if you did two actions of one violation, would only get you one offering. Eating and drinking, which are two separate actions, but they're in violation of one commandment, and thus only one offering. Is that clear? This is not the same as, I've been told that there are similar, actually the reason why on Shabbos they're divided into I've told this is for the reasons of separating how many offerings you would bring. So in a sense it's related. But over here there is no Avon Tolda. Over here the language is Shem Echad. He's got one name. This violation's got one name, one title. There is, because when it comes to the Gemara tells us the reason why on Shabbos we divided the prohibited works into 39 works. Why 39? Just keep it one. All work is prohibited. Why have to have categories? The reason is because each category you're liable for a different offering. So in a sense, what the Torah did by work is divided the one prohibition to 39 prohibitions. So I guess there is a parallel in that sense. But it's not as if eating and drinking are derivations of one, like a tilde of one av. They're just the same prohibition. Follow what I'm saying? No, I'm validating what you're saying. There is the parallel. It's just that it doesn't happen to be the language used here. But yes, that's why there is avos to divide the amount of offerings you would have to bring if in violation. Okay. Now the Mishnah tells us that which we learned in the Shulchan Aruch already, which is achal oichlin she'eino r'uin la'achila. If one ate food that is not fit for human consumption, v'shasa mashkin she'eino r'uin l'shtiya, one drank liquids that are not fit for human consumption, or which is similar to shasa tzir, a person drank brine, this densely dense salt water, or emerdis, which is fish brine, potter they're exempt. Now the reason I don't know for sure, but I think the reason why these two are singled out, even though the Mishnah already stated if you drank anything unfit for human consumption, you're exempt. It's prohibited, of course, but you're not liable for offering. And then the Mishnah singles out these two items from amongst all the drinks that are unfit for human consumption. My guess is because these drinks are fit for human consumption under other conditions. If you had the fish brine with fish, it would be fit for human consumption. So you might have thought, well, because it's a human food, I just happen to be eating it in an awkward way because I'm drinking it out of a glass. Maybe I'm liable. That's why it singles it out. Because your act of eating wasn't proper eating, even though it's prohibited, one's not liable. Okay, Gemara. That's the Mishnah. So the Mishnah established for us that it's a ordinary prohibition like every other. Now the Gemara comes to the discussion, why is it not listed as a prohibition? Amr Shlaka says, why is it that the Torah does not explicitly state a prohibition with respect to inflicting pain upon yourself on Yom Kippur? And Reish Lakish is basically going to suggest that there is no formulation that would properly convey a prohibition, given the nature of what the Torah wants to prohibit. And therefore, the best way for the Torah to communicate to you what the Torah wants you to do is to say it positively, inflict pain upon yourself. And the Reish Lakish is going to go through a few different options of what the Torah could have said and why we would misinterpret it. Following? So says the Gemara. Mishum D'Lo Efshar. Reish Lakish explains the reason why the Torah does not state explicit prohibition is because there is no formulation that would work. How? Heichen nichtav. What should have the Torah written? Nichtav Rachmana. Are you suggesting the Torah should have written Lo yochel, do not eat? That would be prohibitive, right? Do not. It would be a prohibition. Well, the problem there is, then I would say achil b'kazayis. Then I would say, do not eat. What's the measure for eating? Size of an olive. And the Torah doesn't want it to be the size of an olive. The Torah wants it to be the size of a date. The prohibition officially is not to take the edge off your hunger. Olive is constant. Eating the size of an olive constitutes an eating, but is not enough to take off the edge of hunger. So the Torah says don't eat. You would get the wrong measure for liability. You would make it the same as every other prohibition against eating. Eating not kosher is at a kazayas. Eating fats at a kazayas. Okay, eating not kosher is not exactly a prohibition. It's actually a positive command. Well, Torah says don't eat any of the no, there is a prohibition. Don't eat any. Right, the Torah does say don't eat any non-kosher, any impure animals. And milk and meat also has a prohibition. At any rate, all of the prohibitions against eating are kazayas, whereas the size of an olive, which remember we had these three different levels of eating. In eating, taking off the edge, satisfaction. Satisfaction for benching, for the grace after meals, taking off the edge for Yom Kippur, and eating is the universal. So the Torah said don't eat, you would use that universal standard of the size of an olive, and that's not the right size. Okay, so the Torah couldn't just simply say don't eat. Okay, but nichtav rachmana, then the Torah should have written laisona, do not inflict pain. That would be the reverse. Then kumachel, then that would mean go get up and eat. So it couldn't say don't inflict pain. Okay, so these are the two options that Shlakish poses and says doesn't work. Then that would. you would have, then the Torah would have to, well, then it wouldn't fit with those words. The words do not eat mean, what's the universal definition of eating? Desires. Then you're changing the definition already. No, that's what Aristotle is arguing. That the formulation of a Torah saying do not eat would imply a different set of rules. And that's why I can't use those words. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to suggest a few more. And the Gemara introduces the question with the word maskif. I mentioned this before, the word maskif is, right, the Gemara has different ways of introducing questions. And when the Gemara introduces the question with the word maskif, it means we're going to ask a question based on a logical counter argument, as opposed to quoting a source. So the Gemara is now going to suggest, or a number of different scholars are going to suggest alternatives that Reish Lakish did not consider, and going to ask and challenge why can't the Torah use those formulations, and it would lead us to the right conclusion. So the Gemara says, Maskef Rav Oshia challenged, Nichtav Rachmana, let the Torah write. I just want to put out there, I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned this before, but I keep on translating Rahmana as the Torah. Rahmana literally means the merciful one, meaning God should have written, meaning in the Torah. Okay, so Nichtav Rachmana, then the Torah should have written, Hishamer, guard yourself, pen, lest, lo yisuna, you will not inflict pain upon yourself. And that would have been a prohibition. The rule in Torah is, whenever the Torah says, guard yourself, it's not a positive commandment, it's a negative commandment. Guard yourself, lest you do that. So even though the formulation is technically in the positive, you're telling you what to do, but it's telling you to keep away from something. Thus it constitutes as a prohibition, as a loisase, as a negative commandment. Following? So the Torah could have said, guard yourself, lest you not inflict pain upon yourself on Yom Kippur. And now that would have been a prohibition. Following? Says the Gemara, that now you're going overboard. In Cain, if so, nefishilahu, lavi. You've now had extra prohibitions, because the word hishamer, guard yourself, the word pen, lest, also mean, both of those mean prohibition. And that would be two prohibitions on Yom Kippur. And we don't have to go that far. All we want is one prohibition on Yom Kippur. And had you used that formulation that Rabbi suggests, you would have two prohibitions. Because guard yourself, lest, are both prohibitive. So in most cases, you actually could only say one of them. Pen yasura achir lavavcha, lest you end up following your heart. Right? Hishamar nega tzaras. That's the example Rashi gives there. Guard yourself against touching or ruining the leprosy that's on your, the spiritual leprosy, the tzaras on your hand. So over there, because the net thing that's telling you to guard yourself is not a negative, you don't need a double negative to make it a positive. Right? When you say, lest you follow your heart, so follow your heart is a positive, right? Lest is a negative, turns the positive into a negative. It's all good. But when you have thou shalt, or don't afflict yourself, and you want to turn that into when the Torah says afflict yourself, which in a sense is a positive that is a negative. So to turn that into a negative commandment, you have to have two negatives. You couldn't say guard yourself, hishamer lo yisuna, guard, don't afflict the pain upon yourself. It wouldn't work, right? But the guard is negative, less another negative. So hishamer, guard is negative, pen, lest is a negative. Yes, but then it's lest you not afflict pain. Back to positive, you put a third negative. Right? Because the net result, that's what I was saying, because the end result is a negative formulation, the only way to make it an actual negative commandment is to have two negatives before. Therefore, you're stuck with having two prohibitions. And Reish Lakish only wants one. You follow? The syntax, when the last words, I don't know how you say this in English, the subject matter of the actual, there's a word for it. When you say like when you have a sentence, there's the word about, the thing about which you're talking is called a, and then there's all the other things you're saying about it. There's a word, sorry? Right, so the subject itself, and then there's things you're saying about the subject. The subject here is, make sure you inflict pain upon yourself, right? But you have to say that in a negative way. Make sure you don't not inflict pain upon yourself. So what did I just say? Make sure you don't not. I have to negate the negation to make it a commandment that retains its negative, while at the same time concludes with inflict pain upon yourself. So because of that, I'm stuck with making a double formulation of the negative. Thus turning into two prohibitions, not one. Right. But because the subject itself is a negative, I have to have two negatives to turn that negative into an actual negative. Following? That's right. You're right, two negatives make it positive, but the subject here itself is a negative. Following? Exactly. So I have to make it a negative commandment while retaining its positive nature, right? So I have to have triple negative language, leaving me with two prohibitions on Yom Kippur. And Rish Lakish only wants one. And therefore this formulation, Hishamar pen, guard yourself lest, becomes two prohibitions. It would only be one sin offering, but it would just add another prohibition. It adds another layer of prohibition, which Rish Lakish is not ready to demand, as a word of the Torah, that it should have a double negative, have a double prohibition. To say the Torah should assume one prohibition is kind of logical. There's always prohibitions in the Torah against certain behaviors, especially when it comes to punishments. But to expect that the Torah has to make a double prohibition, why should I take it so far? That's what the Gemara is basically saying. Okay, another formulation the Gemara suggests to tell us that there's a prohibition. I don't know if there's an extra consequence. There's more than one prohibition, because in the Torah there are sometimes it's like the Torah says l'chai ve'lo b'shtei lavin. Sometimes the Torah will add another prohibition just to make you liable for two low prohibitions, even though you only bring one offering. Sorry? That's right. You only get lashes once if there's two prohibitions. Two prohibitions for one thing, you get twice lashes. For the same prohibitions appears in the Torah twice, you get twice punished. Then there's two. Okay, so then there is extra punishment. Are you sure? Multiple lavin, but you get multiple lashes. Okay, so then you would get extra. Then you would get extra punishment there. Okay. Okay, so it's one carbon, but more than one lashes then. Okay.
So it's the same thing as anointing, right? When it says the same person. Yeah?
Anointing.
Yeah, you're not inflicting pain on yourself.
Oh yeah, well, because the Torah said 5 times inflict pain, so we came to 5 different types of inflicting pain. Yeah, so not anointing, not showering, all that. If you're of the view that it's biblical, are they a separate carbon? I don't know the answer. Sorry? Right, even if it is biblical, there's no karas there anyway. But maybe a carbon if it's biblical. Right, that's right. Carbon only comes because you did a karas by accident. So because there's no karas, but would you get lashes? Maybe you would get lashes if it's biblical. If it's biblical or not, right? We discussed this when we learned the Shulchan Aruch. Sorry? Well, it depends. I'm not sure what the story. If you're of the view that anointing is biblical, I'm not sure if you get lashes at all. I don't know the halacha there. I don't know. Okay, the Gemara now suggests another alternative way of formulating a prohibition against eating on Yom Kippur while retaining this version of fasting, which is the threshold for liability is not the regular threshold for eating, but the threshold for taking off the edge. Right? The threshold for eating is a kazayas, the size of an olive. Threshold for taking off the edge, which is Yom Kippur, is the size of a large date, as we discussed at length in the previous classes. Okay, Maskah for Rabbi bar Abaye. Rabbi, son of Abaye, challenged and suggested, Nichtav Rachmana, let the Torah read, Hishamar b'mitzvahs inoi. Guard yourself with respect to the commandment of afflicting pain upon yourself. So here, the subject matter is a positive. The commandment to inflict pain. It's a positive formulation. And therefore, you only need one negative to turn it into a negative. Guard yourself against it. In the first version, where the subject matter was, don't inflict pain, we have to have a double negative to make it an actual commandment. Guard yourself lest you not inflict pain, because the subject matter was not inflict pain. Here he changed it and made the subject matter the commandment to inflict pain. And then he added the word, guard yourself on that, which is a negative. So there's a formulation of a negative. A Torah could have used, guard yourself with respect to the mitzvah of inflicting pain on yourself on Yom Kippur. And that would have been a negative commandment, a negative commandment, a prohibition, only one prohibition, while retaining our version of the Torah's version of what you have to do on Yom Kippur.
Don't go to the extreme where you're in pain.
Oh,
Guard yourself.
So that would be if we were to say guard yourself with respect to inflicting pain, you'd be correct. But he added the word with respect to the mitzvah of inflicting pain, which means the guarding here is about you making sure you're doing the mitzvah. Had the word mitzvahs not been there, you would have been right. But stick the word mitzvahs in there. Like guard yourself with respect to the commandment that I have told you to inflict pain upon yourself. That's essentially what Rabbi, son of Abai, is suggesting. But the Gemara rejects this as well and says, "Im kain so, hishamar de lav lav, hishamar de aseh aseh." The rule is, when the Torah says hishamar, guard yourself, it only becomes a prohibition if the subject matter itself is a prohibition. Whereas in this case, the subject matter is a commandment, and thus the word guard will just mean it would just be a compounded concern about a positive commandment, but it would not turn it into a negative commandment. So the word hishamar, guard, usually means prohibitive, but only if it's in the context of a prohibition, not when it's in the context of a positive. Whereas the word pen, lest, would be a negative, but the word pen doesn't work here. Lest, the commandment for inflicting pain, doesn't work. You have to put the word guard, and then you have the double negative, and then you're back to square one when you have two prohibitions instead of one. Okay, the Gemara brings finally one more suggestion before the Gemara gets to a text which actually does derive a prohibition from the Torah. So Maskeflor of Ashi raised the following challenge to Reish Lakish, who said that the Torah could have not formulated a prohibition. Says Rav Ashi like this: Nitaiv, let the Torah read, Al Tosem mina inoi. Do not stray from the self-inflicting. That's a negative commandment. Do not stray from the self-inflicting. Says the Gemara, Kasha. Good question. Challenge accepted, and the Gemara has no counter argument to this. That's the Gemara concludes the discussion. And the Gemara goes from here into telling us that there actually is a Mishnaic age text which does conclude that there is an actual prohibition, not explicit, but implicit. So I don't know that what we're going to learn is a contradiction to Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish was asking about explicit formulation to tell us that there's a prohibition to eat on Yom Kippur, whereas the text we're going to read, God willing, tomorrow, is implicit as opposed to explicit. Okay, so I told you on Friday that I was going to go away. We're supposed to go away on Sunday, but the Eibishter has other plans. So as of now, the plan is to go tomorrow. So I don't know if I'm here early in the morning, what time we're planning on leaving, I have no idea. So sorry? We got an Airbnb in Quebec City. It depends on when my wife wants to leave here. So either I'll be here in the morning or I won't. So either we're continuing tomorrow, which I imagine we will, or we'll pick up on Friday, God willing. Have a wonderful day, everybody.